Hi all and welcome to From Russia with Love 7. Right, let's get into it. This may seem at certain points a little bit off track from what 1 to 6 has gone, but you will find it all circles back and connects the dots. Right, let's get into it. First we had the fuel and also the Aldebruns off-world group, along with the SSP, SS being the prevalent part, working with two groups within Germany, SS, and a main body behind that group. As I understand it, Hitler was not in the original inner circle. That was Himmler, Hess, Mengele and Göring. Now, first off, I'm not suggesting for 1 second that Hitler was good in any way, shape or form. But as an analyst of information that stands away from the narrative and looks at things objectively, does this make sense? Some things connected to the Germans, and in particular Hitler, do not make much sense based on the narrative that we've been given. Hitler was an artist and also a writer. He was interested in archaeology and things of an esoteric nature, particularly relating to the artifacts mentioned in many of the scriptures. He was passionate about his country and people, and at times visionary intellect, given he was in whole or certainly in part responsible for the motorways interstates known as autobahns, and also the VW Beetle car. He then witnessed firsthand the damage the bankers were doing to their country. This was the Rothschilds, which is not a name, it is a title. Now one of the heads of the Ra cult. We will reveal other names of that in a different show, which roped in a term called the Israelites, and also operating on behalf of other Israelites known as the Templars. It was they who started the banking system of harvesting we know today. The Templars took bags of gold and silver off people and the traders, which to this day, gold and silver is still the only form of real money. And they gave pieces of paper in return, stating it was for safekeeping. Did you know you cannot pay off current debt with pieces of paper? You're only discharging the debt, and this is why you never own your own house. Check your deeds. It says on it, you are the tenant, not the owner. But the Templars then went on marches known as crusades, which were along the same trade routes, and into the very towns where the assets came from, and then ransacked it, killing many under the guise of protecting the religious. Yeah, right. So suddenly they had lots of gold and silver, and because of the crusades, too few who came to collect their belongings back, and so they kept all the loot. Why do you think they kept attacking what is now known as Israel? Because they knew all the stuff looted out of Egypt was there, is why. That was done by the previous generations of these harvesting agents. As a quick recap, the original of what we now call the Jews were in India worshipping the Kali Ma, which is the Dark Mother, which I believe is Lilith, related to the moon cult. This was the original Garden of Eden, and there is archaeological evidence to support this, and they were sacrificing humans and animals to the gods. The Rus and the heirs came to teach them against their errant ways, and threw the worshippers out of the Garden of Eden and banished them to Egypt. This is where they then set up the cult of Ra, which is another title, whereby they were attacked again and they fled. This is known as the Exodus in the fake book. A return to the Holy Land, it said, except they went to modern-day Jordan and set up again, which is why Jordan's capital is called Amman, as in Amun, as in Amun-Ra. Some of these people fled and went to Ethiopia and created the Garden of Eden 4, which was the last one, which is why that country is populated with many Jewish people today, and some believe housed the Ark of the Covenant there for a while. These were all followers of the off-world entities, and why both the Jewish and Anunnaki are known as the Chosen Ones. So Hitler, having watched his country get ransacked by the then modern-day version of the Templars, whereby the German currencies went from 4 to 1 British pound to 20,000 to 1. And he vowed to turf out the Rothschilds bankers. Now, can you imagine him in this time epoch now? He would be declared a global hero, taking on the banksters who have robbed us blind. In the year 2000, before the US military started goose-stepping in other countries, Iraq and Iran, there was only 7 countries left without a Rothschilds bank. Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Cuba, North Korea and Iran. All familiar names and all attacked by the military arm of this cult known as the US military. Fighting for freedoms, they say. My arse they are. Fighting for this cult and their controls is the real reason. The narrative that Hitler wanted to eliminate all Jews is kind of negated by the official Red Cross and other humanitarian groups who attended those camps. Plus you had the 2 meetings, one of which Hitler attended, to transfer all Jews out of the camps into Palestine. Why would he do that if he hated all Jews and wanted them all eliminated? It's also stated that not only Hitler, but Goering and others at the top of the SS all had Jewish parentage. Hitler's mother is said, but not confirmed, was Jewish. If you had a hatred of the Jewish people, why would you put them in camps to begin with? If he's a homicidal maniac, as his story tells us, why waste resources on putting them in camps for years? Would you not just get rid of them straight off the bat? Something is amiss here in the official story. How many writers, artists, and someone actively involved or interested in archaeology have you met that are or turn into killers or homicidal maniacs? Or maniacal megalomaniacs? Again, does that make sense? The Thule girls were helping humanity and then got taken hostage by the SS. It is my understanding those girls are still alive, being held underground somewhere. I suspect Greenland. The debate they were helping humanity is still uncertain and not a given, but like all groups, there are good and bad, and so it's kind of folly to broad sweep all as one thing or another. And the same applies to the Jewish people. This cult is using their name as a banner, and the vast majority of Jewish people are completely unaware of what they're being used for. The fuel is connected to the vril, and whilst the vril energy is now being used against us for negative purposes, 110,000 years ago that energy was being used to power the Vitmanas and the Vitmaras spacecraft. And no, they were not Indian at all, those craft. They belonged to the heirs of Urza Minor and the Rus peoples. The criminal element of the SS were working with the Aldebarans, a particularly nasty group with hideous intentions for humans. These had been working with several groups of humans and playing them for several thousands of years, along with the Draco. Is this not all suggestive? And it's up to you all to decide, not me, that there is evidence of two separate operations ongoing with regards to what we call today the Nazis and the SS. With that in mind, let's look deeper into the past and the OSS, the original name for the American Intelligence Service, formed in 1942, we are told. Except there was an earlier version started in 1909, not in America, but the UK. OSS London, with a subsidiary called SI. Oops. The same year, MI5 and MI6 was started. MI6 were also known as X2. Known as the Secret Service, which equates to SS or Schutzstaffel, which was subsequently created in 1925. Remember, all the leading components of World War II signed off an agreement to start a Second World War just a couple of years prior to the forming of the SS. America, President Harding, who mysteriously died in office just after this signing, China, Japan, Russia and major EU countries all signed an agreement to have World War II around 1922 through 1923 time period. Harding, I might add, because this name will come up later, also appointed the banker family Mellon to the Treasury, and also Herbert Hoover, who became President of the US in the same decade. So the OSS was started in America, they say, in June 1942. June. And yet OSS 101 was running in Burma in April of that year under William Donovan. Oops. OSS 202 was running in China, Kunming, Burma and India. OSS 303 out of New Delhi and Sako, China. SACO. OS 404, China base at Kai Yuan and Kandy Ceylon. Another name that's changed, and another country like India owned by Britain, now known as Sri Lanka. OSS 505 ran out of Calcutta, India. Remember, just 5 years later, the UK declared this independent, once the operatives were installed, it seems. A year later, Ceylon was handed over also, but like India, it had its own operatives in place and now installed to run that country privately. Ceylon became the Democrat Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Democrat Socialist Party in Germany became the SS. Just like the Democrat Party in America came to fore, and who were their security force for that party? Why, the KKK, known as Nazis or fascists, or the real meaning, which has nothing to do with Germany or Germans, National Zionism, N-A-Z-I, as in Ashkenazi, as an example, who originated from Asia, and in particular India and the southern Russian countries along the Kashmir region. Kashmir is an off-world base. We are both travellers of time and space, as the song states. The KKK is a programme, oblivious to those who took part in it. It was designed to achieve the opposite effect, supposedly to represent the white people, but the hidden controllers of it designed it in a way that the general public would turn against it. This is known as reverse psychology programming. Once the public are turned against a program by the media manipulation, and it's repeated often enough, the program becomes part of the psyche for many generations. The National Zionist program about the Aryans was the more modern day example of the KKK. Turned the public against supporting the white race, and boy was it successful. Whilst the public turned away, the white race lost 66% of its global demographic in under 100 years. Why has the alleged anti-fascist group called Antifa got the same badge as the German Democratic Socialist Party, which became the SS? It's all clever programming, you see. The hidden hand programs and projects, reverse psychology, and all kinds of mind control programs. Their symbols and symbolism for too long remained hidden, and a public totally unaware of the implications, meanings, or intentions behind it all. Totally oblivious. But not no more, it's not. And this is and will be their downfall. Ceylon, before becoming a British Crown colony, remember, the British Crown is nothing to do with Britain itself. The Crown was ran by the former trustee and later passed on to the Rothschild family to operate, not own, like the Rothschilds thought or think. They were puppets as well. You just haven't seen it yet. That country was owned by the hidden empire again, like covered in previous From Russia with Love chapters, the Dutch. Before the beginning of the Dutch governance, the island of Ceylon was divided between the Portuguese Empire and the Kingdom of Kandy, spelt with a K, who were in the midst of a war for control of the island as a whole. And the island attracted the attention of the newly formed Dutch Republic when they were invited by the Sinhalese king to fight the Portuguese. And the Dutch rule over much of the island was soon imposed. In the late 18th century, the Dutch, weakened by their wars against Britain, were conquered by the Napoleonic France, and their leaders became refugees in London. Now they were hiding out. No longer able to govern part of the island effectively, the Dutch transferred the rule of it over to the British, although this was against the wishes of the Dutch that were residing there at the time. The British and Dutch tea companies were not in opposition. That was the illusion. Public become tired of one group and they install a saviour group who are actually the same organisation. New boss, same as the old boss. Now the capture of the island immediately yielded £300,000 of money in goods, as well as the acquisition of the cinnamon plantations, which made it quite a valuable venture at the time. And the Dutch and then the British, via the tea company venture, was tasked with collecting and controlling all of the world's assets globally. That cost many people their lives and livelihoods to garner full control of everything to which they could exploit, but Marduk could seize control of everything. In return, he engaged the monetary exchange program. Pieces of paper in return for the assets. An endless supply of funds was handed over for these tea company pirates out of the trust. Pirates once of the sea, now on the lands, creating their core pirate companies to eliminate people, steal their resources, take over their governance, parcel up and sell off their lands, install their people, destroy their history, force them into a new religion of their choice, and set the stage for future multinational corporations run by the few. The Dutch role in world domination is often overlooked outside of this show, but this is how they cause confusion and researchers to be misdirected as to who is really pulling the strings. Holland was the country of choice to launch that programme. That doesn't mean the Dutch people themselves need to be blamed or finger pointed at. So we don't have to clog them. As you have heard in my shows, countries are irrelevant in all of this. They, like Britain, Israel, Rome, and the current enemy perceived by the world is America. Yet they're all just puppets. The string pullers operate behind the scenes of them all. Countries are just tools to be used by these people. A hidden cult operating under the banner of modern day Jewish, except these people are not Jewish per se. They are a satanic, demonic cult that started in India. They became powerful in Egypt and spread through the European houses, churches, all of them, and obliterated Russia, then Germany, then Britain, and now America. Think about it for a second of how you are determined as a person via religion. that person is Jewish, negating the fact that all Jews descended out of India and the southern and Baltic states of Russia, known back then as the sub-grey race, after mixing with the Russian whites. The Indians then were jet black, not brown, and were part of the African migration of a certain group of black people. The Jews also came from what is now known as the Eastern countries, the Baltic and in part Caucasian countries, all of which, except India, was Rus and Aryan country. They mixed deliberately to infiltrate and take over. But a child is not a Jew when born. No one was born a Christian, Jew, Catholic or Muslim. You are pristine and pure, devoid of labels. Then society and ignorant parents brand you with a religion. Brand means you become a product. But it also means you have been symbolically branded with an iron, just like cattle. The mark of the beast is where that term comes from. Remember, they consider us the beast. The Black Dictionary description of humans tells you that. Products are bought and sold. Branding is your barcode or social security or national insurance numbers, which comes under the banner of the UN, which is a subsidiary of the Roman Catholic Church. For those new to this series, I call it the Catholic Church, as that church is linked to the worship of cats, which is the representation of Ra. Cult of Ra. So your birth certificate is your documented proof you have been branded and is ready to be bought and sold. Hence you are chattel, a property owned by someone else. Slave came from when Otto captured the Slavs and sold them into slavery. The root of the word slave in the Slavic language is robot. Connecting the dots now. Then we find a word lost to us all now that described how the chattel system works, called deodand. D-E-O-D-A-N-D. Formerly in English law, a personal chattel, which, having been the immediate cause of death of a person, was forfeited to the crown to be sold and the money applied to pious uses. Pious relates to the church and their God. But it's not just the person's estate that was forfeited to the crown, because if a horse and cart ran over a person and killed him, the horse and cart is forfeited also. The word fee, F-E-E, also derives from the ancient root words in several countries meaning cattle. Pay your fees. So perhaps you will understand why, instead of getting the alloidal title, we now get a fee simple. So originally they sold people off by killing them then with the SES-WE-KV Act, declared us all dead. And this is why we have our name in all block or capital letters, as we're classed as dead people. And the Crown owns and sold us into slavery, and this is why all gravestone names are block capitals. That means you are dead. This passage of the actual Act states, SES-WE-KV remained beyond sea for 7 years together, and no proof of their lives. Judge in action to direct a verdict as though SES-WE-KV were dead. Or this, if such person or persons for whose life or lives such estates have been or shall be granted as foresaid, shall remain beyond the seas or elsewhere absent themselves in this realm. In other words, after 7 years you are declared dead whether you're dead or not. Interesting, the term they used in that act of realm, heavenly realm, suggesting there's more realms. It's actually 9. Or is it related to the king and the kingdom, the domain of the kings, that says. So how then do you explain this next word that has also vanished from general use? All very convenient if you ask me. And that word is catdom, the realm of cats. Oh my. Don't be grinning at me now. You know what that means. When born, you have divine rights as a sovereign, or you did. You as the child did not decide your name. You as the child did not decide to become a religious label either. That was imposed on you. So if anyone says to you, I am a Jew or a Catholic, under sovereignty, they're not. Because that was not that person's natural free will choice to become so. That person just accepted their branding and went along with it to fit into society. But it was never their free will choice. Remember that. There is no religious people on this planet that became a religious brand by their own free will choice at birth. I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic, I am Protestant, I am Muslim, Sikh. No, you are the crown of creation and a source-created being, not some made-up branding label to be used for a divide and conquer program or a war-making program. Remember who and what you are. Hi all and welcome back. Right, we're going to get into the meat of what this show's about now, and the role of the OSS, and how they started long before the paperclip crew arrived in 1947 and 1948. This involved all the upper echelons, as they're called, of society, bloodline families, royalty, stars of stage, music and films, plus the banking fraternity, as this next piece will show. During World War II, the Germans used the Enigma machine, a cipher machine to develop nearly unbreakable codes for sending secret messages. Now, the Enigma's settings offered 150 quintillion possible solutions. 150 followed by 18 zeros. This is back in the 1940s. Yet the Allies were eventually able to crack this code. The Allies who cracked the code were likely tied to the former trustee, as it is suggestive of their technology, not ours. Remember, he was playing both sides. He won either way. Now, the Germans bought the patent in 1923 for intelligence purposes, although Polish intelligence, it was said, was able to purchase an Enigma machine at a trade fair. Like they just crop up out of thin air. And also, they procured a code book from a French agent, likely linked to the Rothschilds. All very convenient, if you ask me. But when Poland was overrun in 1939, the Poles realised they wouldn't have the capabilities to solve the code, and gave the information and the machine to the Allies. One wonders if the word Allies means all eyes, like 5 eyes, which was actually 9 eyes, like a cat again. Except now it's no eyes. They've all been poked out. By the end of the war, the British, it says, were reading 10% of all German Enigma communications at Bletchley Park in England, one of the world's first electromagnetic computers, connected to the Veil. This was a 3-rotor Enigma. The Germans eventually added 2 more rotors, and with each change, Allies had to obtain a new machine and code books. Now, the machine itself, it is said, was developed by the Dutch. Why? It was said to communicate banking secrets. Oh my. It was decoded using cryptography. Banking and crypto. Now, where have we heard those terms recently? The prefix of the word crypt means hidden or vault, and the suffix graphy stands for writing. So decoding or deciphering hidden writing or code. So crypto is hidden or vault. It also means a currency, a system of money. So that means hidden vault of money. But currency also means frequency and energy. So could it also be stated that cryptocurrency is to decode the energy and store it in a hidden vault? All in the face for those who can see through the illusion. So let's get into what the OSS organisation, and these are taken directly from CIA documents that were released under the Freedom of Information Act. I have my own comments added to it, but let's go through it. The OSS is divided into a number of branches, each branch being responsible for a particular function in the theatres of operations. branch representatives are often called upon to assist in performing the functions of other branches, and the functions of all are closely coordinated by local and theatre commanding officers. Interesting to note, they call it theatre operations. Why? Because it's all staged. A show. Except the audience don't sit there and clap or laugh. They just get bludgeoned. The two large OSS functions, intelligence services and strategic services operations, are administered by two deputy directors. Under each deputy director are the several branches which carry out particular parts of those larger functions for which he or she is responsible. Intelligence Services, the SI, is responsible for obtaining secret intelligence by means of espionage throughout the world, except in Latin America. Bush and Nazi country. What a coincidence that is. And by liaison with other allied intelligence agencies engaged in espionage. This is now known as Five Eyes, or was. Like I said, now got no eyes. And we'll find out the other reason as to why they were not in South America later in the show, when it all starts to tie in. It recruits agents, sets up chains of intelligence in neutral and enemy-occupied territory, and exploits existing sources for clandestine intelligence such as underground and guerrilla groups and allied secret intelligence sources. SI deals largely in spot intelligence reports called SI disseminations. It exploits local, underground or guerrilla groups. This is where your FARC guerrillas came from. MS-13, Al-Qaeda, Wahhabi, Hezbollah, ISIL, ISIS and Taliban groups came from. Tells you right in their own words. The X2 branch, you'll find, is responsible for counter-espionage abroad. This is MI6. That was the code name for MI6, X2, as well as some security functions in connections with our missions in the active theatres. The branch's spot intelligence products are used largely in support of the Army's CIC, and the branch works closely with the FBI. The R&A, Research and Analysis Branch, is a research branch which coordinates intelligence from all sources and produces finished intelligence studies of a strategic, political, geographical and economic nature. It is said R&A's published contributions to the war effort have been numerous and important. Next branch, FNB, Foreign Nationalities Branch, has domestic functions within the United States. It studies constantly the political temperature of various nationality groups in this country in relation to political events abroad, and subsequently publishes timely reports. For a classic example of that particular group, APAC. Next branch, the CD, Censorship and Documents, has dual functions. A. The securing of censorship materials for the organisation, and special monitoring of enemy broadcasts for commercial and economic intelligence as well as political intelligence, and B. Researching and supply of personal documents required for undercover operations by other branches. Strategic Service Operations, the SO, Special Operations Branch, organises and or supplies sabotage operations behind the enemy lines. Sabotage operations is a fancy word for a false flag operation. It furnished agents and communications and supplies to underground and guerrilla groups in Norway. In other words, NATO. Also organises special teams which are sent behind the enemy lines for the destruction of specific targets, for securing intelligence and waging guerrilla warfare. The MO, Morale Operations Branch, is responsible for subversion of the enemy's morale at home and at the front. Its techniques are called black propaganda, that is, propaganda which purports to come from a source other than the stated one. Propaganda has a hidden term also. It means pro-pagan Dar. Dar means skin. So pro-pagan skin. Its weapons are black radio, leaflets, rumours, poison pen letters, and a variety of black newspapers and other publications. What this is describing is this is your MK Ultra division in essence. And black is a colour-coded programme. MU, the Maritime Unit, was organised to carry out sabotage against enemy shipping. Hello, Iran, recently springs to mind. Modern-day pirates would be the best term for this group. By use of such means as underwater demolitions. USS Cole, anyone? And stealthy forays into enemy harbours, like Pearl. The contribution of this unit has been most important in the field of water transport for agent infiltrations and the supply of agents and underground groups. The Maritime Unit. As a side note, Marduk travelled around on submarines a lot with his minions. The Special Projects Branch is organised to carry out missions of a specialised nature that do not fall in the jurisdiction of any other branch of SSO. The Field Experimental Unit is a special operations group included in the SSO division for administration, planning and operations of this group. However, it is done under direct control from the Director's Office. The OG Group, Operational Group Command, organises and operates guerrilla forces in deep penetration operations. In China and in other places, it has trained and officered guerrilla bands recruited abroad. In France, just prior to and immediately after D-Day, the OG Command dropped groups for liaison and support to the Maquis, who were said to be a French resistant guerrilla-style fighter. Oh my. Let's have a break before we go into the other branches. Private eyes watching you, except eyes work both ways now. Oops. We can see what they do. The other branches of OSS, all other parts of the OSS organisation serve it in either an administrative or supporting and supplementary manner, it is stated. And the first branch of this is S&T, the Schools and Training Branch, which trains OSS personnel both in the United States and in several active theatres. This branch is also responsible for the preliminary screening of recruits for service overseas by means of a psychological assessment program. That's MK Ultra again. By inserting the group into several schools and universities under the banner of the Student Transfer Program. I'll have more on that later. The Planning Group is the top planning and advisory group to the Director, which was Major General William Donovan, and it consists of about half a dozen men, 2 of whom are representatives of the Army and Navy on the highest echelon. The planning staff performs research and technical services in support of the planning group's programme proposals. The Registry of the Secretariat registers and stores the periodic OSS mission reports and other reports from the field. The Reports Office, not to be confused with the Reporting Board, all compartmentalised you see, which is part of the SI branch, is an editorial and routing office for such reports, which then transfers those reports to the portal people, better known as newsreaders. Their news, not ours. Then you have the Communications Branch, which operates an independent OSS communications system with practically world coverage, so that the missions abroad not only have direct radio communications with OSS Washington, but with sub-bases and agents in the field, like their own private telecommunications. And it's responsible for initiating OSS cipher and code systems used in OSS communications. The branch also supplies base radio operators for field teams and radio equipment for these teams. And the OSS utilises the Army and State Department pouch facilities for transmission to Washington of written reports. However, and also State Department cable facilities from some neutral countries. What they're stating there is essentially they're stating they took over all government departments in several countries. That's what they're telling you. The Field Photographic Branch is the motion picture production. Yes, you heard that right. And picture taking branch, which records OSS activities in the States and abroad. It produces OSS training films and has performed strategic photographic missions for OSS, the Army and the Navy overseas. Personnel of field photo accompanied the OSS city teams, which were dispatched quickly to newly liberated European cities. Liberated is not the correct word. So that is another division of the propaganda element, is what they're saying. The VP, Visual Presentation Branch, employs artists and designers. Its function is to present pictorially and in chart form all OSS activities. It is also the procurer of motion picture films produced outside the organisation, and it has done such other jobs as the preparation of special training aids for the S&T branch, which is schools and training. So this division, what they're telling you, took over the media and the film world, and all the actors and actresses in the theatre of operations. All the world's a stage, you see. The R&D, Research and Development branch, acquires, develops and supplies special sabotage and other devices for use in the field, such as camouflage devices for carrying concealed messages, various explosive devices and weapons. The HQ and HQ detachment and the Naval Command perform the usual headquarters functions for Army and Navy personnel that are assigned to OSS. The Naval Command is also the liaison and funnel for all DNI intelligence coming into the OSS, but there are special intelligence liaison officers for liaison with IMS, G2 and JICATs. Now, the reason why Naval Command was head of operations is they are the closest branch of the military connected to the SS small p. Norfolk, Virginia is their main headquarters for current SSP operations, along with Whidley Bay off the Seattle, Washington coast, which even has a place called Langley. You can't make this stuff up. And also Wright-Patterson. Now, for those new, SSP are not humanity-based. In fact, most are not human. They are not helping us at all. Despite what several clown alt-media-led personalities tell you otherwise, they are at best ignorant and at worst humanity sellouts. The security branch checks the security of all personnel before recruitment and is responsible for the physical security of OSS establishments in the United States and abroad. The Special Funds Branch the Special Funds Branch, listen closely to this, because this came out of the trust, disperses unvouchered funds made available by Congress, for which the organisation is not accountable in detail for obvious security reasons. Oh boy. Unvouchered funds made available by Congress, for which the organisation is not accountable in detail for security reasons. This branch is also responsible for the acquisition of the necessary foreign exchange in the field in support of undercover operations. A lot of the holidaymaker firms and currency exchange are tied into these agencies. Thomas Cook was one of them. Right here, what this tells you is of the black budget slush funds account. They've been stealing from the American public. It also is stating that they control Congress, as Congress gives them unvouchered funds for which the organisation is not accountable. It's a common theme, that, is it not? Stealing, murder, subvert and cheat, and not accountable. All very Talmudic, that to me. The chief surgeon is the head of the OSS medical unit here and abroad. This organisation is responsible for the health of the OSS personnel and maintains small but well-equipped hospitals at bases for treatment of illness and casualties. Officers of this branch have also contributed to and helped to evaluate our fund of medical intelligence from enemy and enemy-occupied territory. All the other branches and divisions identified on a chart performs functions which their names imply. The mission of the MO, since MO, according to the OSS General Order 9, is responsible for the conduct of subversion other than physical. Its mission is to create internal dissension between groups, distrust between allies, and to unify and strengthen dissident groups so that the enemy's fighting capacity is impaired. Let's look at that again. Is responsible for the conduct of subversion other than physical. This is them telling you they use non-physical mind control, which is more damaging than physical in many aspects. So what is the missions of the MO? Well, the first one, objective within the enemy state. MO seeks to deepen and enlarge differences among enemy groups and peoples by creating resentment, friction and civil strife among them, manipulating both sides. This means to achieve the desired outcome. This is something we've covered extensively in our shows, their divide and conquer programs. They're playing both sides. Tells you in their own document. Then they use black radio campaigns, posing, quote, as freedom stations of a resistance group within an enemy-occupied country, or as clandestine organ of dissident group in an enemy country, or as an actual enemy station. The more modern day versions of these are YouTube channels and faction-based alt media groups. By now, those of you will be familiar with some of them that I've already outed. They also use word-of-mouth rumours planted by agents in an appropriate situation and sufficiently plausible to retain their credibility. That can work both ways. We planted information last year into Langley 2 servers, and Anna von Wright spat out the whole narrative on her blog. Oops. Can work in both ways. The next way they cause issues or use theatre operations is forgeries. Commercial documents, military documents, business stationery, used to intimidate collaborationists, implicate enemy officials and harass the enemy's secret police. Poison pen letters, disguised as letters from actual business firms, soldiers or other individuals, and containing incriminating information. bribery, inducing enemy officials to perform acts favourable to our cause. Operational ruses, false military orders, manifestos and demoralising rumours disseminated behind enemy front lines to induce surrender or tactical withdrawal. As you can tell by the depth and scope of this organisation, again founded in that time period, 1880-1925, which we referenced in From Russia with Love 4, they essentially took over everything from government, military, media, film industry, and wrapped it into one gigantic control system. The cost in and of itself, in its original form as laid out above, must have been staggering. Well, here is the operatives and what they engage in once they determine a target. Many think they will only target high-level people. You would be very wrong to believe that. And here is a list of 5 particular timeless tips, as it said, from their own manual, from their Simple Sabotage Field Manual. Managers and supervisors. To lower morale and production, be pleasant to inefficient workers. Give them undeserved promotions. Discriminate against efficient workers, complain unjustly about their work. I can hear one member in Ireland now going, Employees are tasked to work slowly. Think of ways to increase the number of movements needed to do your job. Use a light hammer instead of a heavy one, and try to make a small wrench do instead of a big one. Organisations and conferences. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Sounds like politicians. Attempt to make the committees as large and as bureaucratic as possible. Hold conferences when there is more critical work to be done. Telephone. At office, hotel and local telephone switchboards, delay putting calls through, give out wrong numbers, cut people off accidentally. Oh boy, you heard that one a few times. Or forget to disconnect them so that the line can't be used again. Yes, Kim and I have suffered all of that. Transportation. Make train travel as inconvenient as possible for enemy personnel. Issue 2 tickets for the same seat on a train in order to set up an interesting argument. This is what these people do. Many people also make the mistake that they would have to work in their country, and CIA is American only. Big mistake. The CIA's biggest base of operations is in Switzerland, not America. And they're locked in with Five Eyes, the P2, yes you Mr. Fulford, Jesuits, the Nazis, the KGB, Mossad, Freemasonry, and ultimately the cult of Ra. So the question remains, if they're not spying on other so-called enemy countries, as they're all working closely with all of them anyway, the CIA and the KGB have worked hand in hand together since the 1940s. There is no division. That's the public illusion. Who are they spying on, and what for? The answer is us, and the subjugation of us is why. Hi all and welcome back. We're going to, having revealed in their own words, their own document of what the OSS was about, we're going to get into some of the players of the OSS, and this is going to connect a whole heap of dots. Richard Helms. As Americans celebrated victory in Europe in May 1945, Office of Strategic Services OSS officer Richard Helms wrote this touching and eloquent letter to his young son on a captured sheet of Adolf Hitler's personal stationery. Wasn't captured at all. Helms' words captured the meaning of the war, not only for the OSS, but for many others who had fought against Hitler. And yet Helms would later become the director of Central Intelligence. What people miss is the OSS and the SS, the original. There were two versions of the SS, not all were on the same side. The illusion is they were fighting them. You'll see why as the narrative unfolds. Richard Helms, it was said, was a natural-born intelligence officer. Throughout his life, he was the soul of professionalism and discretion, an Easterner with impeccable resume. Their words, not mine. He worked as a journalist in Berlin in the 1930s. In other words, he was a spy, not a journalist. In fact, most journalists were spies, until the system eliminated them in the last 30 or so years in favour of puppets reading scripts from a studio, which was, not surprisingly, started by another pseudo-Jew named Rupert Murdoch and Sky TV. Helms saw Jesse Owens win the 200-yard dash at the 1936 Olympics and chatted with Hitler. That's how he ended up with the paper. After Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, he joined the Navy, served in New York, and got pitched by an OSS officer who said he was a natural for black propaganda. Accepting the pitch meant starting a long career in intelligence, mostly in the field of espionage rather than black propaganda. Helms received only 2 weeks of training before being assigned to coordinate intelligence on Germany, which mostly meant handling the stream of reporting from the OSS station in Bern. There's that program term again. Yes, it's a program. 2 weeks. That right, Dave? In early 1945, he found his way overseas to London, where he worked for and shared an apartment with, all very convenient, with another future director of the CIA, William J. Casey. And one of his most memorable tasks was to prepare young men to parachute into Germany to gather intelligence. He ended his OSS service in Berlin, where ultimately he was replaced by yet another future DCI, Alan W. Dulles, as base chief. Even in the first few paragraphs, we just mentioned all the successive CIA people, or the heads anyway. It was, he remembered, a chaotic time of working against the former Nazis, as well as keeping an eye on the emerging threat from the Soviets. Helm's assignment in Berlin was the first of a series of senior management positions that would eventually propel him to the top of the CIA in 1966. His service as DCI, Department Central Intelligence, was marked by controversy. It had not helped that he worked for two presidents who were suspicious of the CIA. Many in the Johnson administration considered CIA analysis on Vietnam to be too pessimistic, and Helms walked a fine line between serving the president and defending analytic integrity. During the Nixon administration, Helms also became involved in countering the left-wing takeover of Chile and had to fend off White House pressure for CIA to help quash the Watergate investigation. And by the end of 1973, Nixon had had enough of Helms and asked him to resign. He refused, a bit like Mnuchin then, but eventually accepted the president's proposal to appoint him as ambassador to Iran, which was his last senior government post. Why? Because it was likely to set up the Iran-Contra deals going on at the same time, and the ultimate fun and games that episode brought. As a pointer to the background of Richard Helms, the grandfather was the first president of BIS, Bank of International Settlements, and he was the Rockefeller banker Gates McGarrah, who was an official at Chase Manhattan and also the Federal Reserve. Next person, William Casey, born in New York, but born to a Catholic, worked with and for the Jesuits, and he was a member of the Knights of Malta. But during the presidency of Ronald Reagan, he used prominent Catholics in his government to brief Pope John Paul II of developments in the Cold War, whereby William Casey would fly secretly to Rome in a windowless C-141 black jet and be taken undercover to the Vatican. Nice to know the Vatican got informed as to what was going on before the people, despite the people paying for it. Casey was suspected by some of involvement in the controversial Iran-Contra affair. Of course he was, they're all connected, in which Reagan administration personnel secretly traded arms to the Islamic Republic of Iran and secretly diverted some of the resulting income to aid the rebel Contras in Nicaragua in violation of US law. Iran-Contra was really about delivering nuclear weapons to Iran via Israel. Israel gave Iran nuclear weapons. So all this current balloo about Iran getting nuclear weapons is pure lies and diversion. Israel, in league with dual citizens in America, sold Iran nuclear weapons in 1984, the same time the Iran-Contra was going on. Coincidence? Your choice. Casey was called to testify before Congress about his knowledge of the affair, and on the 15th of December 1986, one day before Casey was scheduled to testify before Congress, Casey suffered 2 seizures and was hospitalised. 3 days later, Casey underwent surgery for a previously undiagnosed brain tumour. Casey died in hospital less than 24 hours after former colleague Richard Secord testified that Casey supported the illegal aiding of the Contras. It's funny as to how many times that happens, is it not? You see, this type of death, real or otherwise, did not start with the Clinton death trail. Quote, there is evidence that Casey played a role as cabinet-level advocate both in setting up the covert network to supply the Contras during the Bolland funding cut-off and in promoting the secret arms sales to Iran in 1985 and 86. In both instances, Casey was acting in furtherance of broad policies established by President Reagan. Remember, at this time, this was Reagan Part 2, after Part 1 was shot and killed, I believe, in 1981. The court found that there is evidence that Casey, working with 2 national security advisors to President Reagan during the period 84 through 86, Robert McFarlane and Vice Admiral John Poindexter, approved having these operations conducted out of the National Security Council staff with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North as the action officer, and was assisted by the retired Air Force Major General Richard V. Secord. Now, Secord had retired from the Air Force in 1983 after allegations of improper dealings with former CIA agent Edwin P. Wilson, who was convicted in 1983 of illegally selling weapons to Libya. Iran, Libya, one of the 7 countries that didn't have a Rothschild's bank. It was later found that the United States Department of Justice and the CIA had covered up the evidence in the case. History repeats itself. The DOJ and CIA yet again covering up crimes. This has gone on a long time. Although Casey tried to insulate himself and, more importantly, the CIA from illegal activities relating to the 2 secret operations, again, a common occurrence that is as frequent as timely deaths, is to cover up any involvement in links back to the CIA, as we covered in the Clowns in Panic show. William Donovan, again born in New York, born a Catholic, but this excerpt is indicative. Quote, with the expectation of studying law, Donovan eventually transferred to Columbia University, where he looked beyond Catholic dogma and attended Protestant and Jewish worship services to decide whether he wanted to change religions. He joined the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity, where he was a classmate of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Funny how that happens. There's no coincidences. These meetings are all engineered. These Greek-named fraternities are often overlooked in the alt media, are common with the lower elements of the control structure. They're all involved in them. And no surprise, Robert David Steele is in one of them, called Pi Alpha Alpha. If you're going to do research, check out those Greek named fraternities. You'll find lots of names, all part of it. In 1916, Donovan spent several months in Berlin, just like hounds, on behalf of the Rockefeller Foundation. That name comes up again. Seeking to persuade the governments of Britain and Germany to allow the shipment of food and clothing into Belgium, Serbia and Poland. You see, their trade must go on, whilst everyone else spends time killing each other or hiding. And this shows the levels of thinking of these people. Not go there and try and engineer peace. Oh no, we must keep our money-making trading platforms running. Were they providing food to the American people? Were the Brits providing food to the British people? No. We're going to send it to Belgium, Serbia and Poland. Following his return to the US, Donovan took his wife on a combined vacation business trip and an intelligence mission to Japan, China and Korea, then went alone to Siberia. When he came back, he went to work at his law firm, but also took an extensive journey to Europe, where he did business on behalf of J.P. Morgan and gathered intelligence about international communism. So Donovan worked for the Rockefellers, now J.P. Morgan, setting the stage for a future puppet role, gathering intelligence about international communism. That is BS. Working for and with them groups was promoting it, not investigating it, as you will find out. Donovan also made connections with leading figures in Nazi Germany, but they say he was no friend of the dictator. Yeah, right. Publicly assailing Hitler, Mussolini and Stalin as totalitarians. In public, he lies. As given the company he was keeping, all those top-end people were working with and funding him. He spent much time in Europe taking steps. You're going to love this. He spent much time in Europe taking steps to protect his Jewish clients from the Nazis. Well, of course he would. As it appears from this time, these are the only people that matter. Protecting only his Jewish clients. And yet they mattered so much to so many. According to their own story, they allowed 6 million to die in camps. Again, one must ask, does that narrative make sense? Like I said, these people are not Jews. Like clowns that dress up and present an image, these people masquerade as Jews. In 1940 and 1941, Donovan travelled as an informal emissary to Britain, where he was urged by Knox and Roosevelt to gauge Britain's ability to withstand Germany's aggression. During these trips, Donovan met with key officials in the British war effort, including Winston Churchill and the directors of Britain's intelligence services. Impressed by Donovan and cheered by his eagerness to help Britain, Churchill ordered that he be given unlimited access to classified information. In other words, Donovan was being set up to create another British expansion of secret services inside of America, as you will see. A quote from Winston Churchill in 1922 will raise eyebrows. Quote, "By the end of this decade, we will live under the first one world government that has ever existed in the Society of Nations, a government with absolute authority to decide the basic issues of survival. One world government is inevitable." Unquote. One has to ponder and wonder whether the word nation is actually N-A Zion. Nazion. From 1964 law, the definition is a nation is an organised community within a certain territory. Certainly fits with that description. The term nation-state did not come until 1918, that same time period again mentioned in previous shows. Is it nation or is it Zion? National Zion. Donovan returned to the US confident of Britain's chances and enamoured of the possibility of founding an American intelligence service modelled on that of the British. And he strongly urged Roosevelt to give Churchill the aid he requested. Roosevelt wanted to provide such aid and asked Donovan to use his knowledge of the law to figure out how to skirt the congressional ban on selling armaments to the United Kingdom. So as you can now deduce, Donovan became a British puppet. The Crown, having taken over Americans' finances via the Federal Reserve, was setting the stage for installing their Secret Service into America, aided by Agent Donovan, in my opinion. British diplomats who shared Churchill's admiration for Donovan expressed the wish to the State Department officials that Donovan replace the US ambassador to Britain, Joseph P. Kennedy, who favoured the appeasers and was defeatist regarding British prospects. Joseph P. Kennedy was the father of JFK. And now you know why Kennedy hated the CIA. Like I've said, this was a faction family war, and Kennedy was not operating on the side of the people. He was trying to take down the CIA because of what they did to his father and a hatred of the Bush family. Fact, 100%. Douglas Waller has said, quote, "We could not have formed the OSS without the British, who provided intelligence, trainers, organisational charts and advice, all with the idea of making OSS an adjunct to British intelligence." And there you have it, in their own words. The British were installing their intelligence into America. British Crown ran by the Rothschilds. Donovan began to lay the groundwork for a centralised intelligence programme. It was he who organised the COI, Communications of Intelligence, New York headquarters, no surprise there, in room 3603 of the Rockefeller Center. Again, no surprise there either. That was in October 1941, and he asked Alan Dulles to head it. The officers Dulles took were on the floor immediately above the location of the operations of Britain's MI6. Well, I would never have guessed that either. Oh, very convenient, is it not? But I wonder how many Americans realised MI6 was stationed on their soil before we had the OSS and the CIA? Or why were they there to begin with? So having become centralised courtesy of the public money, they now, with Robert David Steele and OSINT, the NSA, and their data and crypto money programs, wish to become decentralised, which means they are staging a global coup. That was the gist of the Clowns in Panic show. Seeing the picture now? Donovan also set up espionage and sabotage schools, established front companies, now called shell companies or NGOs, plus private contractors, arranged clandestine collaborations with international corporations and also the Vatican, oversaw the invention of new espionage-friendly guns, cameras and bombs. He recruited agents, selecting individuals with a wide range of backgrounds, ranging from intellectuals and artists to people with criminal backgrounds. So the criminals would do psychopathic things. This tells you of their profiling techniques. And this is why they want more data on us all. Donovan also hired a great many female spies, and people thought only the Russians did that. He dismissed criticism by those who felt women were unsuited for such work, and among his most prominent recruits were the film director John Ford, actor Sterling Hayden, author Stephen Vincent Benet, and Eve Curie, who is the daughter of the scientists Marie and Pierre Curie. Other OSS recruits included the poet Archibald MacLeish, the banker Paul Mellon, they of Bank of New York Mellon, which is a Rothschild Rockefeller Jones, Alfred DuPont, who started off in MIT. MIT eventually became a subsidiary of Harvard in 1914. Julia Child, the TV chef, the psychologist Carl Jung. Oh dear, the much repeated Carl Jung was a CIA spy. Author Walter Lord, and members of the Auchincloss and Vanderbilt families. In fact, there were so many aristocrats in the agency that the joke went around that the OSS stood for Oh So Social. As a side note to this, they went on to use Elvis Presley, John Lennon, and also Metallica, to name but a few. Lennon started talking and singing about peace, which goes against what these people operate by, and so paid the price. In 1942, the COI, Coordinator of Information, ceased being a White House operation and was placed under the aegis of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Again, a common practice, the setup and funding supplied by the government from taxpayers' money, and once established a cut-off occurred, except not for the funding, just what they were doing. The same applied with the banking takeover of the Federal Reserve. And it was at this time that Roosevelt also changed his name to Office of Strategic Services, OSS. Donovan was in fact very active in virtually every theatre of World War II. He spent a good deal of time in the Balkans, to which he had urged both Roosevelt and Churchill to pay more attention to. Why? Because he was setting up the next stages. Why? Preparing for the coming private army, paid for by the countries and their people, stated to be for their self-defence, but in real terms was negating the country's military and going private, all under the tutelage of the Rothschilds family, which is now called NATO. NATO is the front for a hidden branch of Italy's Decima mass group. For those of you who are DECIMA, first word, MAS, second word. He met in Europe with highly placed anti-Nazi Germans to broker an early peace that would allow for occupation by the Western Allies, establish a democratic Germany, democratic is SS, and leave the Soviets out in the cold. The question here is, why didn't he speak directly to the Nazis? The answer is, they were working for them and duping the other countries into allowing occupation by the so-called Western Allies, or is it all eyes? Western Allies means the Nazis, National Zionists, and the cultivar takeover of Europe is why. All of it was a ruse, the whole war, a ruse against the Rus people. And the subsequent mind control program ran off it since, that the whole war was about persecution of the Jews. No, they were the patsies, and also the main beneficiaries of it, the pseudo-Jew element of it anyway, not the people. Loot went to Switzerland, the state of Israel created, retribution money appropriated in vast quantities, foundations, museums harvesting guilt money out of everyone, oblivious the whole thing was a ruse. The money was to pay for their harvesting program of us. Donovan wanted to extract retribution for the torture and killing of OSS agents when Truman named the Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, another one based in New York, I might add, to serve as chief US counsel in the prosecution of Nazi war criminals. Jackson, discovering that the OSS was the only agency that had seriously explored the issue, they knew who they were because they were working with them, invited Donovan to join his trial staff. You can't make this stuff up. And Jackson lobbied Truman in person to approve of Donovan's plans for a permanent post-war intelligence agency. However, initially the effort was unsuccessful. However, on September the 20th, 1945, Truman then signed an executive order abolishing the OSS. Perhaps people were starting to put two and two together then. And they do what they always do, change a letter, change a vowel, or create a Hebrew name like Netanyahu, real name Malakovsky, or Rothschilds, Bauer became Bayer. And this abolition of OSS came just 1 month after the very same group who delivered the Manhattan Project dropped atomic weapons on the 6th and 9th of August under the Office of Scientific Research, OSR, which was directed by Vannevar Bush, Although no direct evidence is suggestive he is related to either of the George Bushes, one must question as to why Vannevar's father changed his name. His father was registered as Richard Perry Vannevar. So why did they change their name to Bush? Now, given what we know, that Bush is not the real name for the Georges, but Sheriff, one has to question why. Truman then moved forward with plans for a new intelligence agency and finally gave approval in 1946 for a watered-down interdepartmental Central Intelligence Group, and the CIA was formed along with the National Security Act in 1947. Interesting that they were formed at the same time, is it not? It's not a coincidence, as any investigations into any skullduggery is denied due to national security. Essentially, the term national security is all about protecting the intelligence agencies and their nefarious programs. That's the only reason that act came out. Subsequently, after that, Donovan began experiencing symptoms of dementia, a bit like Casey suddenly, while in Thailand, and he was hospitalised in 1957. While in hospital, he imagined, quote, he saw the Red Army coming over the 59th Street Bridge into Manhattan, unquote. He was right, except they were already here. But the communists are not Russians at all, but the Israelite cults of Ra, the sub-grey race out of ancient India. And it's another example of an agent, once they have fulfilled their duties, suffering from strange illness, disease, or bizarre health issues. And this is part of the MK Ultra in league with big pharma groups playing their dead people can't talk game. Donovan made this quote: "We cannot be sure that the clear and objective scholars who study the existing social systems and draw up the blueprints for a society to suit our technology will always be heard, or that their plans will be put into operation. We can almost be sure that this will not be the case. Therefore, some other power, some third class of individuals aside from the leaders and the scholars must exist. And this third class must have the task of thwarting mistakes, diagnosing areas of potential world disequilibrium, and nipping the causes of potential disturbances in the bud. There must be a body of men whose task it is to throw out the rotten apples as soon as the first spots of the decay appear. A body of this nature must exist under cover. It must either be a power unto itself or be given the broadest discretionary powers by the highest human authorities." Those comments essentially brought in the NSA and the National Security Act of 1947, a front to protect the front, to protect another front. This is how they work. And then this then created the NGO systems, the private contractors, and led to people like Robert David Steele creating side companies, OSS, INT, that gave the appearance of not being connected to the hub, but their very contracts do tie them into the CIA and their interests. We'll be back shortly. The unforgiven. And the people find out what these clowns have been up to. I'm not sure the people are going to be too forgiving either. Let's get on to the another name, the CIA. Alan Dulles. The Dulles family and the Rockefeller families are cousins. Oops. And he was dismissed by John F. Kennedy over the later fiasco of the CIA and the Bay of Pigs, which was kind of the final straw. But as said earlier, JFK wanted to destroy the CIA as soon as he got into office, due to what they did to his father and his rather healthy, I would say, dislike of Bush. Mr. Dulles was one of the members of the Warren Commission investigating the assassination of JFK, one of the planning participants leading a commission into investigating themselves. It's a bit like police inquiries, it's all the same. Dulles, born in New York. Yes, again, born as one of 5 children of Presbyterian minister Allen Macy Dulles, but like Donovan, appeared to change allegiances of religion to another group, as this piece shows. Dulles, in 1921, while at the US Embassy in Istanbul, which is another hotbed centre of the CIA, he helped expose the Protocols of the Elders of Zion as a forgery, except they're not. Then Dulles unsuccessfully attempted to persuade the US State Department to publicly denounce the forgery. You see, they've been covering up stuff for a long time before Snopes, another CIA agent, or Google, Twitter and YouTube, who are all CIA subsidiaries, started deleting their tracks. Later in life, Dulles claimed to have telephoned Vladimir Lenin, seeking a meeting with the American Embassy on April 8, 1917. Lenin, the Jewish Bolshevik leader who hid out in Rothschild's country, Switzerland, throughout the whole genocide. They're all connected, is why. Dulles became a director of the Council on Foreign Relations in 1927 and helped a number of German Jews, such as the banker Paul Kemper, escape to the United States from Germany. Yet again, like mentioned previously, they're all looking after the one people. But I wonder why they were not working to free American soldiers that were trapped there. Stupid question, I know. But shows where these people's allegiances lie. So like Donovan mentioned earlier, how he spent much time in Europe taking steps to protect his Jewish clients from the Nazis, I think it becomes clear by now who these people actually worked for. After the outbreak of the Second World War, Dulles was recruited to work at the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and moved to Bern, Switzerland, where he lived at Herrengasse 23 for the duration of World War II. No chance of these people fighting. As Swiss director of the OSS, like I said, Switzerland is the head branch of the CIA, not America. And so much for their so-called neutrality. But also at the behest of the Rothschilds, Dulles was promoted to the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence, which is second in the intelligence hierarchy. But after the election of Dwight Eisenhower, another puppet, in 1952, Bedell Smith shifted to the Department of State, and Dulles became the first civilian director of Central Intelligence. Bedell Smith was no innocent either in changing the CIA into a private organisation. After World War II, he served as the US ambassador to the now Bolshevik, not Russian, Soviet Union. Another one worked in Russia, like the other one worked in Berlin. From 1946 to 1948, Smith then in 1950 became the Director of Central Intelligence, the head of Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and other intelligence agencies in the United States. Smith reorganized the CIA, redefined its structure and its mission, and he gave it a new sense of purpose. And he made the CIA the arm of government primarily responsible for covert operations. At Dulles's request, President Eisenhower demanded that Senator Joseph McCarthy discontinue issuing subpoenas against the CIA. And in March 1950, McCarthy had initiated a series of investigations into the potential communist subversion of the agency. Not potential at all, it was. Given Smith was ambassador for the USSR and seemingly just walks in as head of CIA, one was not surprised. Although none of the investigations revealed any wrongdoing. Yes, but of course at the National Security Act you can't say anything. And the hearings were potentially damaging at the time, not only to the CIA's reputation, but also to the security of sensitive information, it was said. That's why they created the National Security Act. Of course, none of those hearings went anywhere, and that is why they created the National Security Act 3 years previously. Any awkward questioning of Langley is met with the National Security Act. You know, like a recent piece I did on Marion Horn, a former CIA agent who was requesting documents held by the CIA of the Five-Star Trust, of which he was the signatory, until he went to use the funds and they jailed him and denied him access to the documents under national security. So the man went to jail. This is what another Mr. Horn, no relation, said about the CIA back in 2001. Republican Steve Horn said the CIA should not be exempt from providing Congress critical information on security plans and policies for its classified systems. He said every other agency, including other intelligence agencies, has reported comparable information to the House Government Reform Subcommittee on Government Efficiency, Financial Management and Intergovernmental Relations. And it said the agency is assaulting Congress's constitutional responsibility to oversee executive branch activities, Horn said. He went on, the CIA believes it is apparently above that basic principle in our Constitution, and we do not agree. What that senator was referring to is the three branches of government. Except he and most of America don't understand this. We don't have a government. We have a corporation called the USA Inc. with compartmentalization programs running on a massive scale. And the CIA, although funded through the government, is completely separate from it. No accountability of funds, not allowed to reveal what they're up to, nothing. So you can thank Eisenhower and Bedell Smith for that. But like now, one has to ask, where were Congress when all this was being arranged? Perhaps they were bribed, or as traitorous as the Congress back in 1910 with the Federal Reserve Act. George Tenet said it all in this quote at the time. He said the CIA willingly participates in hundreds of briefings each year as long as they don't involve divulging how the agency does business. And we've allowed this for 70 years. No accountability, never mind to the public. There's no accountability to the Congress or the government. None. McCarthy, as we all know, has since had a character assassination job done on him, and he even carries his own meme, McCarthyism, which is known as the practice of making accusations of subversion or treason without proper regard for evidence. This is a common practice of these people. Remember, it was these same people who created the term conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist. Why? To divert attention away from what they're doing. Or blame the other of doing what they are doing yourself. A common theme in the CIA-based alt media these days also. McCarthy was right. The CIA is communist, but just not Russian communism. The Israelite cult created communism for their takeover of the world. They also created capitalism and also fascism. And by and large has got nothing to do with Jews or Jewish people. They are totally oblivious to it in large part, seduced by the promise of they are God's chosen people. No, you're not. You're pawns like the rest of us. Documents made public in 2004 revealed that the CIA, under Dulles' orders, had broken into McCarthy's Senate office and fed disinformation to him in order to discredit him, in order to stop his investigation of communist infiltration of the CIA. The CIA installed disinfo to stop the investigation of communist infiltration of the CIA. Do you grasp the enormity of that statement alone? How and why is this being allowed? You do realise the CIA has done a communist coup on this country with pseudo-Jews and their Rothschilds, British, French, German and Dutch counterparts. That's what we're dealing with, folks. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation's Skunk Works. We're going to go into them next. More dot connecting. Submitted a design number called CL282 This aircraft was rejected by the Air Force, and the aircraft became what is now known as the U-2 spy plane. And it was initially only allowed to be operated by CIA pilots only. Stupid Lockheed, thinking they're working for America and Americans. No, only the Israelite communists could use the plane. In 1953, Dulles was involved with Frank Wisner in Operation Ajax, the covert operation that led to the removal of the democratically elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, and his replacement with Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, Shah of Iran. There was rumours of a Soviet takeover of the country had surfaced due to the nationalisation of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. This was in 1953. It's still going on. Iran and oil, CIA, it's all the same. And the British diplomat, it was said, Christopher Woodhouse, British diplomat, he was an MI6 agent, had proposed the idea of a coup d'etat to President Eisenhower to regain British control of the oil company. Why does America have to get involved what belongs allegedly to Britain? And by British control, they mean Rothschild's crown control, not the country. Just like the state of Israel created by Britain, not the country, but the crown agents, Rothschilds again. Crown agents were also responsible for the American flag and the anthem. Oops. Why is Iran so important and playing a major role in world politics? Well, the obvious is the oil siphoning, but it goes way beyond that and back in time. As covered in this series, parts 1 and 2, this also involves what is now known as the Balkan states and Eastern countries like Kazakhstan, and Iran is named from the meaning of the land of Aryans. Balkans and Eastern countries all belonged to the Rus and the Aryans. Hence the Israelite cult, who operate the CIA, decide everything belongs to them. President Jacobo Arbenz Guzman of Guatemala was removed in 1954, under Dulles again, in a CIA-led coup carried out under the codename Operation PB Success. Several failed assassination plots utilising CIA-recruited operatives, anti-Castro Cubans directly against Castro, undermined the CIA's credibility. Really, they don't have any. They should never have had any credibility but for the sellout agents being manipulated by the Crown. You know, the reputation of the agency and its director declined drastically after the Bay of Pigs invasion fiasco. And during the Kennedy administration, Dulles faced increasing criticism, so much so in autumn 1961, following the Bay of Pigs incident and Algiers' push against Charles de Gaulle, Dulles and his entourage, including Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell Jr., who in July 1947, Bissell was recruited by W. Averell Harriman to run a committee to lobby for an economic recovery plan for Europe. The following year, he was appointed as an administrator of the Marshall Plan in Germany. The Marshall Plan was the control system ran by Marduk. That document that Kim put out is the Marshall Plan. Bissell moved to Washington, D.C., where he associated with a group of journalists, politicians and government officials that became known as the Georgetown Set. Originally formed in 1945 to 1948 by a group of former OSS veterans from World War II. The grouping would expand its informal membership around the Georgetown section of Washington, D.C., another private club which dictates so much of our society. Bissell also worked for the Ford Foundation for a while, but Frank Wisner, who was involved in the coup on Iran, persuaded him to join the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1954, he was placed in charge of developing and operating the Lockheed U-2 spy plane. See how it all connects back. After Wisner suffered a mental breakdown in September 1958, Bissell then replaced him as the CIA's Deputy Director for Plans. It's funny how all that suddenly happens within these circles. Mystery illnesses, mystery deaths, bizarre meetings in the middle of nowhere, and these people all turn up in top level jobs. The Directorate of Plans reportedly controlled over half of the CIA's budget and was responsible for covert operations. In March 1960, President Eisenhower approved a CIA plan to overthrow Castro. CIA again, dictating policy. The strategy was organised by Bissell. Also involved was Sidney Gottlieb, who was born in New York and born to Jewish parents, of the CIA Technical Services Division, and was asked to come up with the proposals that would undermine Castro's popularity with the Cuban people. Sidney Gottlieb's involvement was not only his involvement in that type of skullduggery, but Sidney Gottlieb also ran the MKUltra project from 1953 to 1964. They came up with a scheme and used the mafia to attempt to topple Castro. So the mafia is another one of their enterprises. Also forced to resign was Deputy Director Charles Cabell. Cabell was the person who set up Project Grudge, which then became Project Sign and subsequently Project Blue Book. Also, like Dulles and Helms, was involved in the U-2 spy plane out of Lockheed Martin. You getting dizzy yet? Going round in circles, connecting the dots? Now, one hypothesis, it was said, regarding the assassination of John F. Kennedy has to do with what is known as the renegade CIA clique. Funny, Obama used the same renegade name as his secret code name. Why? Because he's Langley 3, Muslim Brotherhood. Where one attempts to implicate Cabell and several other CIA officials, including James Jesus Angleton and William King Harvey, as well as what was known as the Three Tramps. And Cabell's brother, Earl Cabell, to add further mystique to it. Who was the mayor of Dallas at the time of Kennedy's assassination? Charles Cabell's brother, Earl. Oops. On November 29th, 1963, the now President Lyndon Baines Johnson appointed Dulles as one of 7 commissioners of the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of the US President JFK. The reason Johnson appointed Dulles primarily was so that Dulles could coach the commission on how to interview CIA witnesses and what questions to ask. Because Johnson and Dulles were both anxious to ensure that the commission did not discover Kennedy's secret involvement in the administration's illegal plans via the CIA to assassinate Castro and other foreign leaders. Oops. Psycho killers. Hi all and welcome back. Where are we next? As covered in previous episodes, we're paying heavily for actions and programs from the late 1880s through 1925. Most of what I've covered grew from that period, and people think crypto is new. No. Try this. The Black Chamber, 1919 to 1929, another one of their colour-coded programs, also known as the Cipher Bureau, was the United States' first peacetime crypto-analytic organization and was the forerunner of the National Security Agency, NSA. The only prior codes and cipher organizations maintained by the US government had been somewhat intermittent at that time and always abandoned in attempts by armed forces branches prior to World War I. Headed by Herbert O. Yardley, the Black Chamber was founded in May 1919, that time again, following World War I, and Yardley had commanded the Army Cryptographic Section of Military Intelligence, MI-8, during World War I. MI-8 was disbanded after the war. MI is British intelligence, not American intelligence, and was disbanded due to agents like Donovan, mentioned earlier. Jointly funded by the Army and the State Department, the Cipher Bureau was disguised as a New York City commercial code company. Them again. It has to be in New York, doesn't it? And it actually produced and sold such codes for business use, but its true mission, however, was to break communications, chiefly diplomatic, it was said, of other nations, according to intelligence historian James Bamford. The Black Chamber secured the cooperation of American telegraph companies such as Western Union in illegally turning over cable traffic of foreign embassies and consulates in Washington and New York. Eventually, almost the entire American cable industry was part of this effort. However, these companies eventually withdrew their support, possibly spurred by the Radio Act of 1927, which broadened criminal offences related to breaching the confidentiality of telegraph messages. So what happened next? Well, the establishment went on and bought all these companies up. The whole of the media and the radio is now controlled by 6 to 10 groups globally. And the breaking of these codes gave birth to the modern systematic scientific code breaking. The Black Chambers survived through the 20th century in a variety of guises and inspired similar organisations in other countries, such as the Secret Office of the British Post Office. And you all thought the post office was to buy stamps and send letters and parcels. No, it created the first spying on the public database. They have all your names and addresses, remember. Then came the Telecommunications Act of 1934, which is still in force today, believe it or not. And the gist of that act was to place all forms of communication, airwave frequencies on, below and above, in the hands of the US military and the Department of Defense. Subsequently, they then had full access to all broadcasts, either by phone, telegram, code machines, all planes and ships coming into the area, onto mobile phones, TV signals, radio signals, and computer signals. All of this was under the tutelage of Bell Technologies and AT&T, both of which control system operated, all of which was funded by the people. Our team, the Trust, went through that whole 300 plus page document, the Telecommunications Act of 1934, and found several loopholes with which the current administration could get rid of the fake news entirely. And to date, subsequently, it has been ignored. Media propaganda, propaganda, facilitated by intelligence agencies, was first started with CBS in the 1920s. Oops. 100 years it's been going now. Nearly. But it wasn't the only thing the public was funding via the CIA. Not only did they control all airways, but added new measures into the fray. In 1970s, the costs of spying on the public and state propaganda was raised when William Schaap's report into Congress caused a major public stir at the time, and no doubt the corrupt media stifled it. William Schaap's testimony to Congress enraged the public when the bill for this black operation was revealed. Quote, about a third of the whole CIA budget went to media propaganda operations. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year just for that. Close to $1 billion are being spent every year by the United States via the CIA on secret propaganda. Unquote. Close to $1 billion back in the 1970s. Can you imagine what that figure is now? It must cost them enough to run and pay the agents in the alt media alone, never mind other fields. CIA Director William Bill Colby attested before the Church Committee that more than 400 CIA agents were on the payroll to feed media sources fabricated stories aimed at steering public opinion. And people listen to the news. President Ford issued an executive order 11905 in an attempt to reform intelligence agencies until Reagan overruled that and issued Executive Order 12333, which intended to extend powers and responsibilities of US intelligence agencies and direct the leaders of US federal agencies to cooperate fully with CIA requests for information. It's unreal. Executive Order 12333 has been regarded by the American intelligence community as a fundamental document authorizing the expansion of data collection activities. Understand where this is going now? The document has been employed by the National Security Agency, the NSA, as legal authorization for its collection of unencrypted information and encrypted. So encryption was developed by the CIA. You don't think they didn't put backdoors in it. Flowing through the data centers of internet communications giants Google and Yahoo. NSA. Ford and Carter banned the political assassinations via US intelligence services. That was the initial executive order. But in 1998, the CIA changed the wording and reclassified targets as being connected to terrorism. And so getting around the executive orders. So when you hear, good evening, this is your news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, ABC, CNBC and Bloomberg, all brought to you courtesy of the CIA and its parent company, the Cult of Ra. It's all there. President Gerald Ford fired Colby after that revelation that 400 plus CIA agents were on the payroll to feed media sources fabricated stories aimed at steering public opinion. And during the proceedings, he brought in a replacement. George Herbert Walker Bush, who completed the CIA's testimony. Well, of course, Lizard Breath would complete the testimony, you know. His successive family lines have done more damage to this country with each generation, most of which is oblivious to the majority of the American public. Bush Sr. assured everyone there were no other programs to worry about. He even promised that the CIA would stop influencing the media. And if you believe a single word that came out of that demonic psychopath's mouth, you are at the point of being certifiable. As covered in the Clowns in Panic show, of how the CIA is working directly with the NSA. One, in fact, could state that these are in essence the same organisation, all ran by the British OSS and the more modern version now known as GCHQ. NSA is a subsidiary of GCHQ. Just like the CIA became a subsidiary of the OSS, the NSA became a subsidiary of GCHQ. It gets worse. The CIA went into schools, colleges and universities in the 1940s with more of the American people's funding to play a new game of mind control and espionage. The National Student Association, also NSA, received funding from the CIA and the NSA itself, which was founded at a student convention in Madison, Wisconsin in 1947, same year again, in order to represent the United States in the IUS. The Madison Convention also created an NSA subcommittee on international affairs and gave it authority to deal with international issues. The key move was the separation of the main NSA office, which was in Madison, from the international division, which was housed in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was the Cambridge branch of the NSA that received most of the CIA's funding and also did most of the CIA's bidding, whilst Madison was kept out of the loop. Guess which other organisation is housed in Cambridge, Massachusetts? MIT. After the Second World War, our superpower solved this dilemma in exactly this way and on exactly this line of reasoning from the more or less official start of the Cold War. That was Harry Truman's speech to Congress in March 1947, announcing his policy to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. That is, he said, communist aggression. The United States created fronts and secretly infiltrated existing non-governmental organizations in order to advance American interests abroad, but not American interests. Almost exactly 20 years after Truman's speech in February 1967, the government's cover was spectacularly blown by a college dropout. The dropout's name was Michael Wood, and the operation he exposed was the CIA's covert use of an organisation called the National Student Association. And it was said that revelation had a cascading effect and helped mark the end of the first phase of the Cold War. Paget reveals that even before Prague, American students were subject to surveillance and scheming by three groups: the US State Department, the FBI, and the Catholic Church. Oh my. As previously mentioned of secret flights done by the CIA head Casey to the Vatican to give them allegedly details of the Cold War, which is a complete cover in and of itself. There was no Cold War. it was just another way to create a black budget programs with alleged boogeymen, which they created, passed on to the American public in fear programs, telling them they're all going to die again, when in essence it was all part of a covert psyop that involved many of the globalist elites, including the Vatican Church, to take over the world for their new world order. We'll be back soon. Hi all and welcome back. What will be the final portion of tonight's show. I would have liked to have gone into more about the CIA and their involvement with the National Student Association. Essentially, this is a covert program involving MK-Ultra, mind control, profiling, and pulling in American kids and kids from all around the world based on their profiling, and then shoving them into covert operations and arenas. That's what they've been up to since 1947. The Church of the Poisoned Mind, the Catholic Church. Oh boy, have they poisoned minds. Destroyed them in many cases. So who are the players in and around the Vatican Church? Well, you have your 13 black nobility group who choose the grey and black popes. White pope is a public PR front and carries no clout whatsoever. You also have the Italian mafia, which was created by the Vatican Church to collect funds from clandestine operations, including drugs, gambling, trafficking and racketeering, of which the proceeds of those funds went to the Vatican Church. Then you have the Knights of Malta crew, also connected to the church. But the one that most avid researchers are familiar with is the P2 Lodge, known as Propaganda Due, D-U-E. Another secret society that was banned in Italy. That just means they went underground, outside of control, not eliminated. So where does the P2 Lodge kick in, and do they have links with the CIA also? Remember I mentioned earlier that the OSS had no jurisdiction in Latin America, and here's why. Outside of Italy, the P2 was also active in Uruguay, Brazil and Argentina. It was in these countries that the P2, along with the CIA, launched Operation Condor, which essentially was a takeover of the whole of South America and install their puppets. Argentina in particular, involving Pinochet, the military junta who was aided in gun running by a certain priest named Jorge Mario Bergoglio, or commonly known as Pope Francis. Who was actually born of an Italian immigrant mother. Although Operation Condor was described by the CIA as a cooperative effort by the intelligence security services of several South American countries to combat terrorism and subversion, guerrillas were used as an excuse, as they were never substantial enough to control territory, gain material support by any foreign power, or otherwise threaten national security. Condor's key members were the governments in Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia and Brazil. Ecuador and Peru later joined the operation in more peripheral roles. It was said that the United States government provided planning, coordinating, training on torture, which was perfected in Vietnam and known as Project Phoenix. I wonder where we heard that term mentioned several times. Connect the dots. Also technical support and supplied military aid to the juntas during the Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter and Reagan administrations, and such support was frequently routed through the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. A declassified CIA document dated 23rd of June 1976 explains that in early 1974, security officials from Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay and Bolivia met in Buenos Aires to prepare coordinated actions against subversive targets. Condor was an operation similar to Operation Gladio. The strategy of tension used in Italy in the 1970s, of which Licio Gelli was a member. Licio Gelli was an Italian financier, liaison officer between the Italian government and Nazi Germany, and chiefly known for his role in the Banco Ambrosiano scandal. Oops. Connecting more dots. He was revealed in 1981 as being the venerable master of the clandestine lodge Propaganda Jew, which is the P2 Lodge. And it proves the case of the CIA and the P2 Lodge are part of a larger clandestine group whose sole aim is to disrupt every single country and install their puppets. It was discovered in 2010 that Henry Kissinger cancelled a warning against international assassination of political opponents that was to be issued to some of the countries that were participating in Operation Condor. And the National Security Archive reported, founded by the Pinochet regime in November 1975, Operation Condor was the code name for a formal Southern Cone collaboration that included transnational secret intelligence activities of kidnapping, torture, disappearance and assassination, according to the National Security Archive's document evidence from the US, Paraguay, Argentina and Chile files. All there. Operation Condor killed 60,000 people, of which 30,000 is in Argentina alone. 30,000 people disappeared and 400,000 were imprisoned. Henry Kissinger played a prominent role in Operation Condor, and there was an extradition order for him to stand trial in August 2001. Argentine Judge Rodolfo Canicoba sent a letter rogatory to the US State Department in accordance with Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, requesting a deposition by Kissinger to aid the judge's investigation of Operation Condor. On the 16th of February 2007, a request for the extradition of Kissinger was filed at the Supreme Court of Uruguay on behalf of Bernardo Arnone, a political activist who was kidnapped, tortured and disappeared by the dictatorial regime back in 1976. The editors of the New York Times, no surprise, defended Henry Kissinger, arguing, quote, that he should be given a pass for his role in Condor and other dirty works because the world was polarised and fighting communism involved hard choices and messy compromises, unquote. The New York Times. Replace N with a J. And then you've got the correct term. Arthur Hayes Sulzberger. Adolf Simon Ox. Arthur Ox Sulzberger. All owners of the New York Times. 2 born in New York. All 3 born to Jewish parents. Why does that not surprise me? And why would they defend Kissinger? All the same people and all the same cult is why. The Parliamentary Commission of Inquiry, headed by Anselmi, concluded that the P2 Lodge was a secret criminal organisation, and allegations of surreptitious international relationships, mainly with Argentina. Gelly repeatedly suggested he was a close friend of Juan Perón, and which some people suspected of affiliation with the American Central Intelligence Agency, were also partially confirmed. Not partly confirmed at all, but fully active. And a further example of the lengths investigations go to and preventing any negative feedback to the CIA. All others get thrown under the bus, but they remain unscathed. That has to stop. Another group who appear to be indirect and not related to the CIA, but are, is the Tavistock Institute, created 2 days after the CIA, formed with and the help of a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, the same foundation that fund Planned Parenthood, remember, amongst other things. Coincidence? I think not, given who was the background and the driver of this institute. Although he died before Tavistock was formally established, Kurt Lewin was an important influence in the work of the Tavistock. Kurt Lewin, born in Prussia, modern-day Poland, born to Jewish parents. How many times now has that got to come up before people see it as a common fact and not just spout anti-Semitic? How is it possible a tiny minority of people are all central of almost every rogue organisation or criminal group? The sheer volume of it in this series alone should make even the most avid skeptic not only raise eyebrows, but start to question what is now the frankly absurd official narrative. Lewin served as a professor at the University of Berlin. Same time as Helms, I think it was. During which time he conducted experiments about tension states, needs, motivation and learning. In 1933, Lewin had tried to negotiate a teaching position as the chair of psychology, as well as the creation of a research institute at the Hebrew University. Oops. Lewin, often associated with the early Frankfurt School, originated by an influential group of largely Jewish Marxists at the Institute for Social Research in Germany. But when Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, the Institute members had to disband, moving to England and then to America. In that year, he met Eric Trist of the London Tavistock Clinic. Trist was impressed with his theories and then went on to use them in his studies on soldiers during the Second World War. Now, Lewin immigrated to the United States in August 1933 and became a naturalized citizen in 1940. And a few years after moving to America, Lewin began asking people to pronounce his name as Lewin rather than Levine, because the misspelling, it was said, of his name by Americans had led to many missed phone calls. Yeah, right. Another example of creating an anglicised name to hide the fact that he was Jewish. It wasn't Lewin, Lewin, it was Levin. Levin. Tavistock, on one hand, was a branding company involved in psychological social engineering, and on the other were the left-hand path of MKUltra in non-physical mind control experimentation. It is said, it's not said, it's confirmed, they created the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, rap, and also hip-hop for subversive purposes. They were also involved in the feminism and transgender movements and programs, plus various other divisive programs launched on the people. Now, cited as Lewin's or Levine's influences was Leon Festinger, born in New York, born to Jewish parents. Leon became known for the term cognitive dissonance. Blumer Wilfovna Zygarnik was another of his influences. Born in Lithuania, born to Jewish parents. Morton Douche was another one. Born in New York, but unable to attain his parentage. Lewin came up with the theory of force field analysis, which may give people a clue of how they work. Force field analysis provides a framework for looking at the factors, forces, that influence a situation, originally social situations. It looks at forces that are either driving movement towards a goal, helping forces, or blocking movement towards a goal, hindering forces. And the key to this approach was Levine's interest in Gestaltism, understanding the totality and assessing a situation as a whole and not focusing only on individual aspects. Seeing the bigger picture, essentially. Further, the totality for an individual, their life space, derives from their perception of their reality, not an objective viewpoint. Their perception of reality provides the clue there in that passage, and here is how they deliver it. An early model of change developed by Levine described change as a three-stage process. The first stage he called unfreezing. It involves overcoming inertia and dismantling the existing mindset. It must be part of surviving, and defense mechanisms have to be bypassed. In the second stage, the change occurs. This is typically a period of confusion and transition, where we are aware that the old ways are being challenged, but we do not have a clear picture as to what we are replacing them with. In other words, the mind is confused. What they knew, what it's being replaced with. The third and final stage he calls freezing. The new mindset is crystallizing, and one's comfort level is returning to previous levels. Levine's three-step process is regarded as a foundational model for making change in organizations. Subsequently, MK is also 3 stages. And after the third stage, the person is unaware of who they are or what they do. Levine also worked on what he called group dynamics. Critics shared the opinion at the time that groups did not exist as scientifically valid entities. It had been said by skeptics that the actions of groups were nothing more than those of its members considered separately. Levine justified group existence by using the dictum, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." He theorized that when a group is established, it becomes a unified system with supervening qualities that cannot be understood by evaluating members individually. This notion that a group is composed of more than the sum of its individual members quickly gained support from sociologists and psychologists who understood the significance of this emerging field. Quite why they couldn't understand it before is beyond me, but most of them are book people. I hope more who listen to this show haven't just heard the last few paragraphs of how we change our mindset and think and act different fits into what we are doing in THI, not what they are doing. Essentially, we are deprogramming on a massive scale, and not all are up to the task, and why it's important for the group to remain unified. It is their antithesis of divide and conquer, and why this group is targeted heavily, who have undergone the mindset freezing program mentioned earlier. If our light cannot unfreeze it or them, which is an external light from the programmed person's perspective, the key, as always, is their own internal light must shine, which is why it is pointless at this juncture trying to wake them up. They have to do their own work. And perhaps now people will understand this quote better. Immigration of the future will not be country to country, but from their world into our world. A world of perceived reality into actual reality. And I hope with this show it has connected some more dots for you in this series, the depth of which is staggering. This is a highly organised cult, hell-bent on taking over the world and its resources at any and all costs. And only the outing of it and highlighting it will bring an end to the amount of deaths, suffering, raping and pillaging that has plagued us all for many generations. The question remains, if all this fighting for freedom and getting rid of dictators, despots, communists, tyrants that has gone on for the last 100 years, with all of them now out of the way, why hasn't our lives improved one iota? It hasn't, because the real tyrants are still in our midst is why. And perhaps some of the leading figures that were killed were not the problem after all, just the ones who killed them. This has been From Russia with Love 7. I hope you all enjoyed it. A lot of details, a lot to get your head round. But I hope it's now given you more of the bigger picture of what has and in part is going on currently. These characters are all connected wherever you look, and it's up to every one of us to bring them down. This has been the Truth, Honour and Integrity Show. My name's Thomas Williams.